Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Million Dollar Baby, starring Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank, Morgan Freeman, G.B.M.H, Mike Coulter, and Anthony Mackie, directed by Clint Eastwood. Now, I thought about doing a Clint Eastwood retrospective a long time ago after I think I'd done the No Name Man with No Name trilogy, but at the end I was like, you know what, this is gonna take too long. I don't see what the point is. And I've done longer, like he's had a long career. But in this, and he ended his career recently with Juror Number Two, which I ended up watching, and I thought it was a good movie until we get to the ending. But I won't talk about that. So I remember going to theaters for this thing like in 2004, I think is when it came out. So yeah, it was 2004, and I went to theaters for it and was impressed by it. But how impressed was I? Let's get into the movie. In a boxing match with Big Willie Little, played by briefly by Luke Cage, is Mike Coulter, as his trainer Frankie Dunn, played by Clint Eastwood, tells Willie after bleeding so much, let the opponent hit him, as Maggie Fitzgerald, played in an Oscar-winning performance by Hilary Swank, watches Willie win the fight and asks Frankie to train her, and he doesn't train girls, and at one point Frankie says, "Girly, tough ain't enough." While Frankie turns down a championship fight with Big Willie, and I enjoy boxing movies in general, as this is one of them as well. While Frankie talks with the priest, as he asks so many questions about how many gods there are. As we get back to the gym, and we get a narration for this timing by Eddie Scrap, aka Iron Dupress, played by Morgan Freeman, about the people training, for example, Barch, played by Jay Baruchel, Shalrell Berry, played by Anthony Mackie before he's Captain America in the new movie coming out in a couple of weeks, and his trainer Omar, played by briefly by Michael Pena, while Eddie tells Frankie Willis is talking to not Willis, Willie is talking to another manager named Mickey Mack while Maggie is training at the gym and calls Frankie boss. And I really like the characters as the familiar faces are tremendous in this movie, while the new stars back in 2004 are pretty decent in their roles. Maggie continues training at Frankie's gym continuously for 6 months, while Frankie wants Danger to pay his dues, and Frankie comes off like a hard ass, while at nighttime, Eddie trains briefly with Maggie as he lives in the gym and gives her some advice on how to punch a bag. And the screenplay is very well done, and this movie is well done and made, while the acting in this is tremendous, and a comedic scene where Sharrell picks on Danger until Maggie tells off Sharrell, and Danger makes fun of Sharrell as Omar and other gym members laugh at about it, as that cracked me up. Frankie wants his punching bag back that Eddie let Maggie borrow, and he gives her advice to find a fighter in this gym or another gym, and decides to give it to her anyways, while Frankie is at home about a fight for Big Willie, as Big Willie comes by the house and tells Frankie he's got to leave him as he wants the championship title before September, as that was a sad scene. And the cinematography is pretty good in this movie, while Frankie wants Danger out of the gym while in a bad mood, as Eddie talks with Frankie about what Big Willie did, as he really comes off like a hard ass. And Clint Eastwood does a good job pulling that off while directing this movie, and this movie is terrific. Frankie comes by the gym and gives Eddie a cheeseburger to eat while he hears Maggie training at the gym, while explaining to Frankie her backstory about her family, or actually, Maggie does, and she begs him to train her, and he takes her on as his trainer for a brief time, and he begins training her, like move her feet, for example, and tells her how to hit the punching bag, and watching her balance as well as breathing, while Eddie watches Frankie training Maggie, and eventually finds her a manager named Sally Mendoza, and I'm gonna just say it, he's a dude, man, and the production design is great. Maggie fights with her opponent while Frankie and Eddie watch the fight, as Maggie is doing terrible at first, as she's getting her ass beaten until Frankie comes in and decides to be her manager, and she fights back with Frankie. Then Sally being there, and she beats her other opponent's ass, or I mean her own opponent. What the fuck? Anyways, with the damn knockout, and she wins the fight. And Frankie decides to give Maggie the weekend off, but she trains at the gym anyways. And the writing is tremendous in this movie. Maggie knocks out one opponent after another by the end of the first round, while Frankie takes a chance to put her in a championship while her nose is broken, and she continues to fight while Frankie has to fix her nose. And round two begins as her opponent is tough at first, but she beats her ass anyways. And she gets to the hospital with Eddie as she continues to fight, and she's knocking out one opponent after another, like I said, and he gets good offers. And we meet a dirty boxer named Billy, aka the Blue Bear, but Frankie turns her down as Maggie continues to train while working at a restaurant. And Eddie takes her to a restaurant to eat until Mickey Max shows up there. And this movie is working as a boxing movie, as this is like probably one of the best, in my opinion. Other than Rocky. The first Rocky's the best. Mickey tells Maggie she's not leaving Frankie for him, as Frankie tells her she has a fight with Billy, and she prepares for it and gets to the fight with another opponent and beats her ass by the second round. And the editing is tightly done, as this is a little over 2 hours, but hell, I'm not complaining. Maggie feels guilty for her opponent and buys her mother a house behind her mother's back, as she takes her mother as well as her sister Mardell to the house. And the mother comes off very disrespectful to Maggie's success, as well as buying her the damn house. And she's got terrible reasons to stay at her trailer while her brother JD is getting out of prison, and they go back home. While on the way back, Maggie talks about dogs, and they stop by a diner and to have some lemon pie. And the score in these scenes was typical Clint Eastwood, but it works for this movie, or his movies in general. Danger asks a question about how he freezes a bottle of water, as he was looking at it at one point earlier in the film, as Eddie shows him while Frankie goes to Las Vegas with Maggie for the fight, as Sherelle clogs the toilet on purpose, I'll say, for reasons I'm about to explain, for Eddie to clean and beats up on Danger, as Eddie comes in and fights Sherelle and beats the crap out of him, one with the glove and one without the glove, and he saves Danger from getting beat up by Sherelle, which was a powerful scene done by Morgan Freeman, and there's a good reason he won Best Supporting Actor, and this clip proves it to me. As we move on to the fight between Maggie and Billy in the Las Vegas arena, beginning while Eddie watches from his home, aka the gym, and the fight begins and pulls out some dirty boxing moves, while we move on to round two as the ref warns Billy, pull that crap off one more time and she's disqualified. And Maggie fights fair as Billy is tough for damn sure. And move on to round three. When that's done, Billy takes a punch to Maggie to the point she breaks her freaking neck. And I'm like, oh my god, that was not only a rough fight to watch, but this is getting to the point it's getting depressing, as Billy made it a draw and pulling off that crap, as it was an effective scene in my opinion. Maggie ends up at the hospital as her neck is in critical condition and can barely speak, as Eddie happens to be there to care for Maggie with Frankie, while Frankie blames Eddie for making him train Maggie in the first place and wants to move her to a different hospital, as the doctors in the area don't know squat while the nurses are amateurs, and takes her to a different hospital that looks nice. And there's a damn good reason this got to the best picture of the year back in 2005. Well, this movie came out in 2004, but whatever. Maggie's family say they're going to visit her in the hospital, but they don't at first, because as we go to the next scene, they get there from Disneyland and Universal Studios Hollywood and other themed parks, as they do visit her and want her to sign a piece of paper with their lawyer saying Maggie giving them all of her money, as well as the house and she bought for them. And as she doesn't, and they're terrible. Like, while we meet JD, he comes off like an a-hole to Frankie. And they tried to force her to sign the papers, but she refuses, thank God, because she knows they're terrible people to begin with. So she kicks them out and never sees them again for the rest of the movie or her life. I'll explain why in a few minutes. And it serves those hillbillies right. And this is getting more and more depressing. And I'll talk about why in the next sentence. Frankie gets home and sees an envelope as Maggie asks him to kill herself. And he says he can't do it as he gets a phone call while at home from the hospital in the middle of the night about how Maggie tried to bite her tongue and alerted Frankie as the doctor stitched up her tongue to a point she can't bite it ever again. While walking to a church and talk with the priest, and who seems very much not like a priest because he comes off dismissive to Frankie while cussing him at the beginning of the movie. And he tells Frankie to leave her with God as she's not asking for God's help, she's asking for Frankie's help. And Frankie checks up on Maggie at the hospital, and she's getting much worse as time goes by, and Frankie realizes it as this is damn depressing. Eddie talks with Frankie as Frankie apologizes about it, what he said to Eddie, about how it was his fault when it wasn't, as he confesses that. And he believes she did all right. And in the next scene, he goes to the hospital to grant her a wish by putting her to sleep with a needle while unplugging the machine. And he feels guilty to a point he disappears and never returns to. While Danger does show up at the gym again and trains with Eddie, as Eddie narrates about how Frankie's daughter sent back his letter informing her his true character, while going to the diner that Maggie took Frankie to earlier in the film as he eats some lemon pie. And the climax was depressing, but this movie told a powerful story about, well, not about, but and how powerful it was, the story. Let's get into the rating and you'll see. I'll give this movie a 9.0 out of 10. I'm a sucker for boxing movies, what can I say, as I really like the characters, while the familiar faces like Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank, and Morgan Freeman are tremendous in this movie, while the new faces like Michael Pena, Anthony Mackie, and G.B.M.H are pretty good, as well as while the directing by Mr. Eastwood is terrific in this movie. The screenplay is well done, as the writing is tremendous, and the editing was tight throughout, as this is a little over 2 hours, but I was never bored with it as the boxing movie, as well as for the sport, as it's always more interesting than, say, golf or baseball, in my opinion. Sorry, Mom. And this movie works for a boxing movie, as the score was typical Clint Eastwood, but it works for his movies in general. The final 40 minutes is depressing for damn sure, as it was effective, and this is a strong movie, and it works as one of the best boxing movies since the first Rocky. And this is a strong recommendation for this movie, as this is one of Clint Eastwood's masterpieces. And there's a damn good reason this got Best Picture Oscar back in 2005, as it was a powerful story between a trainer and his boxer, and it was told tremendously. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and until then, I am a champion, not